Oh God, I mean, we went through some very traumatic events.
This incredible stuff was happening in my career. At the same time, he was going through the trial.
Jennifer Lopez shocked everyone by making a surprising appearance in the P.Diddy trial. As the courtroom doors creaked open and she stepped inside, the entire atmosphere shifted instantly. The usual buzz of whispers and shifting seats vanished into a heavy, stunned silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes snapped toward her, jaws almost visibly dropping. The packed gallery, a mix of journalists, legal experts, and curious onlookers, seemed to hold its breath, caught off guard by the unexpected arrival of the international superstar. No one had anticipated her presence in this high-stakes courtroom drama. Not here, not now. And the air was electric with anticipation. Clad in a sleek black suit and dark sunglasses, Jennifer Lopez's entrance was powerful, deliberate, and radiated both strength and solemnity. The room, already heavy with the gravity of the trial, now felt suffocating with tension. This wasn't just another celebrity appearing in court. This was a woman who had been silent for over 2 decades, walking into a space built to hold truth. And she had come to speak hers. All eyes turned toward the defendant, Sean P. Diddy Combs, who sat stiffly beside his legal team. At first, he didn't seem to register who had entered, but as Jennifer slowly removed her sunglasses and looked directly toward him, something flickered across his face, a flicker of disbelief, quickly masked by a forced composure. But it was too late. That moment of panic had already exposed him. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and quick glances as attorneys whispered urgently to one another. Several journalists tapped furiously on their phones, no doubt alerting the world that J.Lo had just walked into the P.Diddy trial, and not as a bystander, but as a key witness. The judge, maintaining control of the courtroom with stern efficiency, called for silence. "Order, please. Let's proceed," she said, but even her voice betrayed a hint of surprise. It was evident that Jennifer's presence had not been pre-announced or anticipated, and it had thrown the proceedings into a new, volatile direction. Jennifer's expression remained composed, but her eyes held a quiet fire, a fire lit by years of buried pain and unspoken truth. As she made her way toward the witness stand, the mood in the courtroom transformed from curious anticipation to profound discomfort. Everyone in the room, especially Diddy, understood. What was about to be revealed had the power to change everything. Dressed in a modest yet commanding black suit, Jennifer Lopez walked with measured grace to the witness stand. Every step she took was deliberate, echoing softly in the tense courtroom as if time had slowed to let her presence sink in. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore minimal makeup, not for glamour, but for seriousness. This was not a performance, it was a reckoning. As she sat and adjusted the microphone, the room, once a flurry of whispers and shuffling papers, was now wrapped in total silence. The air was thick, almost oppressive. Jurors sat forward in their chairs. The court clerk avoided eye contact. Reporters didn't dare type. Everyone waited. Jennifer's gaze scanned the room, pausing briefly when it landed on Sean P. Diddy Combs. The tension between them was unmistakable, an entire history compressed into a few seconds of locked eyes. Diddy looked visibly rattled. Though he tried to maintain a mask of control, the signs were there. His clenched jaw, his twitching fingers, and the way he shifted restlessly in his seat. He knew something was coming. But no one, not even him, seemed prepared for what Jennifer was about to reveal. Jennifer Lopez's voice broke the silence, soft but hauntingly clear. "I was scared to death to say anything, because I didn't know what he might do to me," she said, her words landing like a hammer blow in the hushed courtroom. The fear she described wasn't just a momentary panic, it was a slow, suffocating dread that had lived inside her for years. The kind of fear that doesn't go away when the cameras are off or the doors are locked, the kind that stays in your bones. Her voice wavered slightly at first, but each word seemed to gain strength from the truth behind it. As she spoke, the room remained still, captivated and shaken. The woman known to millions as an untouchable star now revealed the fragile human pain she'd been carrying for decades. And behind that pain, a long history of emotional captivity. "He made me believe that speaking out would ruin me," Jennifer continued. "He had power, he had connections, and he made sure I knew that. He told me I owed him everything, that without him, I was nothing." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let a tear fall. It was clear she'd cried enough behind closed doors. This moment was for speaking, not weeping. Lopez described how her life during their relationship became a carefully constructed illusion, glamorous on the outside but terrifying behind the scenes. He controlled everything, she said. Where I went, who I talked to, what I wore, even what I said in interviews. And if I pushed back, he'd remind me who was in charge. The courtroom listened in a stunned silence. Jurors sat wide-eyed, some with furrowed brows. One woman on the bench reached for a tissue. The judge leaned slightly forward, her face unreadable but intensely focused. Jennifer concluded this portion of her testimony with a line that seemed to encapsulate the essence of her experience. I wasn't in a relationship, I was in a cage. A beautiful one, yes, but a cage nonetheless. Her voice, once trembling, now carried conviction. The weight of her silence had finally been lifted, and in that courtroom under oath, she began to reclaim her voice and her story. The tone of the courtroom grew noticeably heavier as Jennifer Lopez's testimony took a darker, more chilling turn. What began as a recollection of fear now unraveled into a detailed portrait of emotional destruction. The kind of torment that doesn't leave bruises but leaves scars on the soul. He would tell me who I was, what I was worth, and it was never enough, Jennifer said, her voice firm despite the tremor that briefly crept in. He told me I was lucky to be with him, that without him, I was just another girl from the Bronx trying to sing and dance. He broke me down, piece by piece. She described the psychological warfare as constant and insidious. It was brainwashing, manipulation. Every time I had a thought or an opinion of my own, he'd twist it until I doubted myself. I stopped trusting my instincts. I stopped believing in me. The courtroom, filled with seasoned attorneys, hardened reporters, and attentive jurors, sat silent, not out of boredom or fatigue, but because they were visibly disturbed by what they were hearing. Jennifer continued, detailing how the emotional abuse was often masked by brief moments of kindness, calculated, rehearsed, and always timed to keep her tethered. He knew when to be sweet. When I was ready to leave or question him, that's when he'd flip the script. Gifts, apologies, even tears. It made me think maybe I was wrong. Maybe he did love me. That's the trap. That's how he kept me. Jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One older man rubbed his temple as if trying to process what he was hearing. Another juror scribbled furiously in a notebook. A court officer near the door kept his eyes on the defendant, who by now sat rigid, his hands folded tightly, eyes focused on nothing in particular. He no longer looked indifferent. He looked cornered. He isolated me, Jennifer said. He didn't just make me feel worthless, he made sure I had no one else around to contradict that feeling. Friends faded away, family visits became rare, and every time I questioned what was happening, he'd flip it and say, "See, you're the crazy one." Perhaps the most haunting line came near the end of her statement in this section. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I was still smiling for cameras, doing interviews, going to events, but inside, I was gone. I was a ghost in my own life. Gasps and quiet exclamations echoed throughout the courtroom. Even some of the court staff, seasoned professionals used to harsh testimony, appeared visibly shaken. A clerk discreetly wiped tears from her eyes. Jennifer's words laid bare the terrifying reality of emotional abuse, the slow, calculated erasure of identity. And though she sat on the witness stand alone, her voice seemed to speak not just for herself, but for countless others who have endured similar invisible pain. By this point in the testimony, the courtroom was gripped in a kind of stunned, immobile silence. Even seasoned reporters, those who had covered trials filled with tragedy and scandal, now sat motionless, their pens and devices still. The air felt dense, no longer just heavy with tension, but choked with disbelief. And then Jennifer Lopez dropped a revelation so disturbing it shattered what little composure remained in the room. Her voice, already tinged with emotion, dropped lower. She spoke slowly, clearly bracing herself for the weight of the words. There were parties, she said, private ones. Exclusive, and they weren't what they appeared to be. Her eyes flicked toward Diddy, who by now sat as still as a statue, his face pale, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. Jennifer paused for a moment, breathing in deeply before continuing. He would make me sleep with other men, and he would watch. A gasp echoed from the gallery. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Jennifer closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again with visible effort. Sometimes he filmed it. I didn't consent to that. I didn't want to be there. I was drugged more than once. Her voice cracked just once, and that alone was enough to move many in the courtroom to tears. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a beat, stunned by the horror of what had just been said. The judge, who had remained composed throughout the earlier parts of the trial, quickly banged her gavel and called for a 5-minute recess, citing emotional distress in the courtroom. People stood, but no one moved. It was as if the room couldn't decide whether to flee or remain frozen in place. One juror visibly shook his head in disbelief, while another, a woman in her 40s, wiped at her eyes with a trembling hand. In the gallery, one reporter dropped her notepad and didn't bother picking it up. When Jennifer stepped down briefly to collect herself, her entire posture radiated a quiet courage, the kind born not from heroism, but from surviving hell. Behind her, Diddy's legal team appeared in chaos, frantically whispering to him while he stared blankly ahead, unblinking. Outside the courtroom, reporters raced to file breaking headlines. Inside, people whispered in hushed, reverent tones, like they were in the presence of a dark truth too raw for daytime news. These weren't just celebrity party stories. They were accounts of exploitation, coercion, and abuse, far beyond anything the public had ever imagined about the glamorous world orbiting Diddy's empire. Jennifer Lopez had just pulled back the velvet curtain, revealing not opulence and privilege, but a nightmare hidden beneath designer suits and platinum records. When Jennifer Lopez returned to the stand after the brief recess, the courtroom remained eerily silent. The audience, still reeling from her previous testimony, braced themselves for what more might come. And what came next only deepened the darkness of the truth she was unraveling. She sat with a quiet intensity, her hands folded in front of her voice now steadier, colder, like someone recounting a trauma so deep it had been rehearsed in their mind for years. There were times, she began, when I lost entire chunks of time. Hours, sometimes days. I would wake up in rooms I didn't recognize with the doors locked from the outside, and I'd have no memory of how I got there. Gasps rippled across the courtroom once again. A juror leaned forward, his mouth slightly open in shock. Court officers exchanged grim looks, their expressions hardening as the reality of Jennifer's words began to settle in like ash. I remember one night in particular, she continued. We had been at a party, one of those private ones. I had a drink in my hand, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a small room with no windows. The door was bolted. There was a camera in the corner, watching me. I didn't know what had happened or why I was there, but I remember feeling like I was in a prison. Jennifer's voice cracked just slightly, not with helplessness, but with the pain of recalling something she had spent years trying to forget. She explained that when Diddy would finally let her out, he would act as if nothing unusual had happened. He'd say I just drank too much, that I was being dramatic, that I should be grateful he took care of me. The courtroom hung on her every word. The jury was visibly shaken. One juror covered her mouth, while another kept scribbling notes with a trembling hand. Even the bailiffs, who had heard more than their fair share of testimony over the years, looked visibly uncomfortable. Jennifer went on to describe the psychological aftermath, the gaslighting, the shame, and the growing terror that something worse might happen if she ever told anyone. I felt like I was going crazy. And that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted me confused, disoriented, obedient. Throughout her testimony, Diddy remained completely still. His eyes never met Jennifer's. Instead, he stared at the floor in front of him, his face void of emotion. But his stillness wasn't composed. It was cold, and to many, it looked like guilt turned to stone. Jennifer ended this portion of her testimony with chilling clarity. I wasn't a girlfriend. I wasn't even a person to him. I was something he owned, something he could drug, control, and silence. As Jennifer Lopez continued her harrowing testimony, the courtroom remained transfixed, caught between horror and heartbreak. With the same calm resolve that had defined her appearance from the beginning, she moved into one of the most insidious elements of her experience, the isolation. He didn't hit me, she said, her voice firm but haunting. But the damage he did was deeper. He broke me down from the inside out. She paused briefly, collecting herself as the words lingered in the air like smoke. It started slowly. First, he'd question why I was spending so much time with certain friends. Then it was why I was calling my mother so often, why I needed to talk to people at all. She shook her head, almost in disbelief at how systematic it had all been. Before I realized it, I wasn't talking to anyone anymore. Jennifer described how Diddy's manipulation was so subtle at first that she didn't see it for what it was. He disguised it as love, as protection. He'd say, "I just want you to be safe. These people don't really care like I do." But what he was doing was cutting the lifelines one by one. She explained how her team, her dancers, her assistants, anyone who had once been part of her inner circle, began to disappear. He'd fire people behind my back, or make them so uncomfortable they'd quit. People I'd trusted for years just vanished, and I was left alone, completely dependent on him. That was the goal, complete control. The courtroom sat frozen. A few jurors shifted in their seats, visibly shaken by the realization that Jennifer's story wasn't about a single monstrous act, but a carefully constructed system of domination. One that operated in the shadows, behind closed doors and within whispered conversations. Jennifer continued, her voice unwavering despite the rawness of her confession. He isolated me so completely that I started to doubt my own thoughts. I didn't trust myself. I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was ungrateful. That's the kind of poison emotional abuse is. It doesn't just hurt you. It makes you believe you deserve the pain. Her eyes scanned the room, not seeking sympathy, but offering truth. I looked in the mirror and I didn't see me anymore. I saw someone who belonged to him. Court officers exchanged looks, some visibly disturbed. A few spectators in the gallery wiped away tears. Even the judge, who had remained composed through hours of testimony, appeared solemn, her jaw clenched tightly. Jennifer closed this portion of her testimony with a statement that silenced the room. People think abuse is about bruises, but what he did to me, the fear, the isolation, the gaslighting, it stayed with me longer than any scar ever could. He didn't need to use his fists. He used his words, his power, and his access to destroy me quietly. And I let it happen because I thought I loved him. There was no noise, no cough, no whisper, no movement. Only the weight of one woman's truth, and a courtroom finally beginning to understand the depth of what she had survived. The courtroom, once a venue for legal procedure, had now become a theater of truth. And what was being revealed was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. After hours of exposing the emotional devastation, the control, and the deeply disturbing realities of her past with Sean Diddy Combs, Jennifer Lopez began to speak about something different. Something that quietly began to shift the atmosphere in the courtroom: escape. Her voice softened, but it did not shake. I stayed with him for 18 months. 18 long, confusing, painful months, she said. But one day, I looked in the mirror and I didn't know who I was. I didn't recognize myself, and that terrified me more than him. Those words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For all the horror she had endured, it was the realization of her own erasure, her own vanishing, that finally lit the fuse that led to her breaking free. Jennifer explained how over time, small moments of clarity began to surface. There were tiny flashes, like when a song I loved would come on and I'd feel something, or when I'd hear someone laugh and it reminded me of a time I was happy. Real happiness, not the fake kind I had to perform. Those flashes, she said, became more frequent, more intense. They reminded me there was still a me under all the fear. I just had to find her again. She credited therapy with giving her a language for what she'd gone through. I didn't even know what gaslighting was. I didn't know what trauma bonding was. But once I learned those words, I started to understand the patterns, the mind games, the way he kept me trapped without ever touching a chain. Jennifer also spoke with gratitude about a close friend, unnamed in court, who played a pivotal role. This friend didn't push. They just listened. They reminded me who I was, slowly, gently. It was the first time I felt safe in a very long time. That support, paired with therapy and physical distance from Diddy, gave her the clarity she needed to plan her exit. Though she didn't publicly share the details of the final incident, court officials confirmed that a portion of her testimony was given behind closed doors, marked as sealed due to the graphic and sensitive nature of the events. What she did say in open court was simple but powerful. There was a night that changed everything, a moment where I realized that if I stayed any longer, I would disappear completely, or worse. Her departure was not a dramatic escape in the middle of the night, but a carefully calculated act of survival. I left quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I packed a bag and disappeared, and I never looked back. There was an audible sniffle in the gallery. A few jurors dabbed their eyes, and even the judge appeared visibly moved. This wasn't just the story of abuse. It was a story of resilience, of reclaiming identity, of surviving what others never even see. Jennifer ended this portion of her testimony with a quiet strength that spoke louder than any scream. I thought leaving would kill me, but staying would have. By the time Jennifer Lopez reached the later stages of her testimony, the courtroom had become more than just a place of legal procedure. It had transformed into a chamber of reckoning. The atmosphere was thick with disbelief, sorrow, and a growing realization that the public image of Sean Diddy Combs was unraveling in real time. Spectators in the gallery, which included media personnel, court reporters, and a few members of the public lucky enough to gain access, appeared visibly shaken. Some clutched tissues or napkins from their bags, eyes rimmed with red. A journalist from a major entertainment outlet quietly put away her camera, too stunned to continue filming. One man, a longtime industry insider, whispered to a colleague, "This changes everything." The legal staff, normally stoic and detached, struggled to maintain composure. A young paralegal sitting behind the prosecution was seen biting the inside of her cheek, her eyes brimming with tears. Another clerk, seated just a few feet from the witness stand, avoided looking directly at Jennifer, seemingly overwhelmed by the emotion in the room. The jury, 12 ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, wore the burden of her testimony in their expressions. One female juror dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, clearly trying to maintain professionalism, but unable to fully detach from what she was hearing. A middle-aged man on the jury kept his gaze fixed on the floor, blinking rapidly. Another, in his 20s, stared directly at Jennifer with an expression of silent respect and sorrow. The humanity in the room was undeniable. This was no longer just a trial. It was a moment of collective reckoning. Even the judge, a seasoned and respected figure known for her strict adherence to decorum, could not fully mask her reaction. And then there was Diddy. The man at the center of it all sat like a statue for much of the testimony, but not always. There were moments when his calm cracked. He shook his head repeatedly during Jennifer's more damning statements, mouthing words no one could hear. At other times, he leaned in to whisper to his attorneys, his eyes darting across the room with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. His face showed flickers of anger, of confusion, of a man trying to contain something explosive beneath a fragile surface. Observers noted that Diddy's typical public bravado, the charisma, the confidence, was gone. What sat in its place was a man shrinking under the weight of accountability. By the end of the session, the room was not just filled with observers of a celebrity trial. It was filled with witnesses to a truth long buried, now unearthed under oath, with nowhere left to hide. As Jennifer Lopez finally stepped down from the witness stand, a profound stillness swept through the courtroom. It wasn't the relief of an ending, nor the tension of anticipation. It was more like a collective, heavy exhale, a release of long suppressed truths that had finally been spoken aloud. For those inside, it was a moment of reckoning. For those watching around the world, it was the unveiling of a reality that had lurked beneath the glamorous surface for far too long. Outside the courthouse, media crews scrambled to capture every moment. Cameras flashed as Jennifer emerged, her expression composed yet fierce, no longer just the dazzling star millions knew from the stage and screen, but a woman reborn through courage and defiance. Reporters noted the slight tremor in her step, the subtle exhaustion etched across her face, but also the undeniable strength radiating from her every move. Social media exploded within minutes. Hashtags calling for justice trended globally. Fans and activists alike flooded platforms with messages of support, applauding Jennifer not only for her artistry, but for her bravery in speaking out. Commentators, legal experts, and survivors of abuse weighed in, turning this trial into a broader conversation about power, manipulation, and the urgent need to hold even the most untouchable accountable. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was markedly different. Sean Diddy Combs, once the commanding mogul known for his influence and charisma, now sat diminished and exposed. His defenses, carefully constructed over decades, had been systematically dismantled by Jennifer's testimony. The man who had seemed untouchable, both in business and in the court of public opinion, was laid bare in a way that few expected. Legal analysts predicted that Jennifer's detailed and compelling testimony could be a turning point in the trial, potentially reshaping the narrative around Diddy's public persona and his future. But beyond the courtroom and the headlines, the greater impact was more personal and profound. A high-profile voice had broken the silence on abuse and control, inspiring countless others to confront their own stories. Jennifer Lopez had stepped into the courtroom as a witness, but she walked out as something far more powerful, a survivor who reclaimed her narrative and challenged the world to look deeper. And as the trial continues, the eyes of the world remain fixed on what will come next, forever changed by the truths that have finally come to light. Jennifer Lopez's courageous testimony has shattered illusions and exposed a harrowing reality behind the glitz and glamour. Her strength in speaking out against Sean Diddy Combs not only challenges a powerful figure, but also amplifies the voices of countless survivors. As the trial unfolds, her story stands as a powerful reminder of resilience, the importance of truth, and the ongoing fight for justice and accountability.